Have you been feeling lately like you need to recharge your spiritual batteries? Well, we have just the thing for you. Join us for Lift Up Your Heart, a Magnify gathering. This is a day-long event meant for women to gather, recharge, listen to inspiring speakers, live music, and most importantly, be reminded of what we already know, that Jesus Christ is our answer and that we're not alone. It's everything you loved about Time Out for Women and more, and it's coming to a city near you. The best part is if you're a listener, you get a special discount code at checkout. So register now by following the link in our show notes and use the code podcast10 at checkout to get $10 off each registration. That's code podcast10, PODCAST10 at checkout. Go to magnifythegood.com/events or head to the link in our show notes. The first city that's open is Plano, Texas, and it's coming September 24th, and registration is open now. We can't wait to see you there.
When Staisha and Michael Sheffield brought their little, nearly 3-month-old baby boy Clayton home from the hospital on January 31st, 2023, they were told that he wouldn't make it through the summer. In celebration of his birthday in November 2023, his mom wrote on Instagram, "This year has carved us out. We have redefined miracles and readjusted what we hoped for. But after months and months of intensive therapies, medications, and doctor visits, we have made it. 1 year with our little guy. Clay's future is still unknown, but for now, he is here with us, small but mighty." End quote. Staisha Stratton Sheffield grew up in Orem, Utah. Coming from a big family of 8 kids, she always knew she wanted to have a big family of her own. Staisha went to BYU, graduating in health education, served a mission in Croatia, worked and traveled extensively, then finally found her Prince Charming, Michael, who was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. They are currently living in Birdseye, Utah, where they are taking care of a family ranch and navigating raising 4 young children, each with their unique and special needs. This is All In, an LDS Living podcast where we ask the question, what does it really mean to be all in the gospel of Jesus Christ? I'm Morgan Pearson, and I am honored to have my friend Staisha Sheffield on the line with me today. Staisha, welcome.
Thank you, Morgan. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, it is so fun for me always to have a chance to reconnect with an old friend and to be able to do this and share it with other people, because I think that you have so much to be able to share with people based on the experience that you've had over the last couple of years. But I want to start at the very beginning of your experience with your 4th baby, Clay. I wondered, so as I was preparing for this interview and trying to brief myself on timeline and everything, I wondered, had your pregnancy been totally normal up until the night that you thought you had food poisoning, or were there any signs leading up to that?
Yeah, it is so interesting because, like you said, this was my 4th baby. My husband, Michael, and we got married a little bit later, we were married 29, and we're like, hey, we want kids. We got to have these kids quick. So my kids, I had 4 kids, but they also came very quickly. So it was
relatable.
My oldest was 4 at the time. So, but with that said, it was pregnancy. I knew what was going on, and we had been very privileged that I had normal pregnancies, and it was very nothing out of the ordinary. So with this 4th baby, it was completely normal. There was no hiccups, no problems. And that's, I think, the biggest reason why when I started throwing up after a large family gathering, I'm like, it's just food poisoning. I ate something weird that's upset my stomach. So that was my only warning sign, really.
So at what point did you decide, I probably need to go to the doctor rather than just think it was food poisoning? Because I probably would have thought the same thing.
So I started throwing up on November 5th, around midnight. And it was about every 30 minutes I was throwing up. And in the back of my mind, I had my mom's voice always saying, you got to stay hydrated when you're sick, stay hydrated. And so I would drink water. I tried to eat applesauce but I'd immediately throw it up. But it wasn't until about 11 o'clock on Sunday. So it was a Saturday that I started throwing up. Sunday that my vision kind of started going where I'm like, I probably should call about this and see what my doctor says. And so it was kind of like at that point, they're like, you need to come in.
Yeah. So you go in and it's determined that you need to have an emergency C-section. Tell me a little bit about what you remember about that day, and tell me about, you've said that there were a lot of miracles that day. So tell me about kind of what happened.
Yeah. God is so good, Morgan. I want to start about a little bit before the day. So this was a Sunday, and my husband had just been released. We live up Spanish Fork Canyon. First off, we live about 35 minutes from Spanish Fork, Utah. So we're kind of in the wilderness, and my husband had just been released from a calling. He was in the High Council, which had taken him typically on Sundays down into Spanish Fork from early morning to mid-afternoon. And so the first miracle is that he had been released, and he was at our branch just 10 minutes down the road. Because on that Sunday morning, he had taken the kids to church because no one else was sick, and I was at home. And so I was able to text him, hey, come home right after church. Something's not right. I think we need to go in to get checked. So when he came home, it was quick, and we were able to load up the kids and head down the canyon. So that was another miracle, that we made it to the hospital. Another huge miracle is that I have a lot of family in Utah County. And so when we made it to the Orem Community Hospital, which is where I delivered my 3 previous children, my sister, Amber, was able to be there really quick to do a baby swap. So Michael dropped me off at the entrance of the hospital, and I went in and I kind of checked in. They put me in a wheelchair, and I was just feeling awful at the time. And right when I was being wheeled in to the room, I had a seizure. I kind of felt it coming on. I was like, the nurse was asking me questions, and I had the thought, I think I'm having a seizure. And then it all kind of went black after that. And what happened was, I had my seizure. A nurse ran out to get Michael, who was still kind of switching the kids with my sister. And she says, we need you now. Your wife had a seizure. Come in right now. And so Michael comes running in, and my sister was able to take my kids and also call my parents, who were in California with my grandpa, who actually was on hospice. Anyway, she calls them and she kind of lets them know what's going on. And my dad sent out a text to my family and to my extended family saying, pray for Staisha right now. She's at the hospital and she's had a seizure. And so within about 15 minutes, I had my 3 brothers there and my sister there to be with Michael during this really intense time that they didn't know what was going on with me. And so my family was there, people were praying, and miracles were happening. Because what happened was I had an eclampsia seizure. You hear about preeclampsia, right? And it's like they monitor your blood pressure, but I had no signs, kind of like what we said. And what happened was my body was shutting down. And so I had the seizure, my placenta ruptured. And so I was bleeding out, and they had to quickly do a C-section. Like, I was only 28 weeks pregnant. So they did a C-section. They got the baby out, little Clay, and got me put back together. And then we were both life-flighted to Utah Valley Hospital, because Orem Community, it's a perfect hospital when you have a normal pregnancy, but they're not quite equipped for bigger things.
Right. I totally get that. Okay, so tell me a little bit from that point where you're life flighted, you get to Utah Valley Hospital. Tell listeners about what happened from there that leads us to where you are now. I know that's a lot to ask.
Yeah, no. So Clay was born once again at 28 weeks. So he was considered a micro preemie. He was 2 pounds, 5 ounces, but initially everything checked out. From his head to his toes, like he was fine. He was just small. His brain was okay. His lungs, his heart, everything was okay, but he was just small. However, when they started to try and feed him, nothing was passing through his intestines. Like there was something going on. They'd never quite seen something like this, but there was a blockage in his intestines. And so what ended up happening, he had a surgery. It was Meckel's diverticulum. And if you were to have this as like an adult, they just go cut out the bad part of your intestines, sew you back up, and you're fine.
Okay.
But because of his size, he was so small, they had to take out the blocked part in his intestines and then leave his intestines on the outside of his body. So there were 2 spots on his stomach that so he would eat food, and then there would be a bag where they would collect the food, and then they would refeed the food to his other side of his stoma. It's called the other opening, and then it would go into a poopy diaper. And so originally they said, okay, he had this surgery. Now we just need to wait for him to be at least 5 pounds, and we'll put him all back together. It's fine. Nothing to worry. Like we're going to be okay. And so all right, we're doing okay. But then things just happened. He kept getting infections, and then really freaky, out of our control things that happened where he had another blockage. So they had to go in for a second surgery, and then his intestine twisted around one of his openings. So he had to go in for a third surgery, and then his veins were collapsing. So they had to go and put a Broviac, like a central line in. And throughout this whole thing, they were always checking his brain, checking his heart, everything else, and everything was okay. He had infections, but they were able to treat it with antibiotics, and he was doing fine. His eyes were fine, pressures were fine. But then towards the end, before he was quite the weight that they wanted, he had a hernia around one of his stoma, and the surgeon's like, we need to go put him back together. Like, he's been through a lot. Let's just put him back together. And so we're like, all right, let's do it. Let's put him back together. It's been a wild ride, but let's do it. So they put him back together, and then he goes septic.
Which is terrifying.
Which is, I've never seen him that sick. His incision had split open, and it was red and inflamed, and they were watching the infection, and it was really scary. And during that time, they did a normal routine head ultrasound, and then that's when they found some abnormalities. At that time, they couldn't really tell us what was going on because it was just a head ultrasound. So we need to go take him to do an MRI. But at this point, he had been they'd gotten the infection under control. So they went and did an MRI, and they came back, and they said 2/3 of his brain had been permanently damaged, to a point where it if you were to look at the MRI, it was just black. So it was like the brain had been damaged and then filled with fluid. So it wasn't, they're like, this is not gonna fix itself. It is damaged, and it was all in the back half of his brain, back 2/3 of his brain, and then there were 2 spots in the front. And so that was a huge gut punch, to say it lightly.
Sure.
His brain was fine. That wasn't ever a worry. It was just his intestines that we were worried about. And right at the very, almost to the end, is like, nope, his brain is gone. And with that came the diagnosis. It's called periventricular leukomalacia. And that's
a mouthful.
right, say that fast. That's kind of the umbrella. And then within that, he had a cortical vision impairment, meaning the part of his brain that processes what he sees was wiped out, right? It's like, so his eyes are fine, but he can't really process what he sees and also process really what he hears. And then he also has severe cerebral palsy. So originally the neurologist was like, he is not going to be able to see things other than shadows. He won't be able to really hear. That he failed his hearing test in one ear at the hospital. Later, that wasn't quite the case, but like he won't be able to process what he sees. It will be unlikely that he will ever developmentally progress past a 6-month-old for his whole life. Like that was the big thing. Like he will be stuck as a 6-month-old for whatever, however long. And with that, they also said because of all these things, he might lose his ability to like suck, swallow. So he will not be able to feed himself or communicate. And with the cerebral palsy, the list goes on, like he'll get tight and his bones can start breaking, like all these things, And so it was a really heavy diagnosis of potential seizures and you name it. Just kind of like something that we didn't anticipate.
Right. So let me make sure that I have this straight. So up to that point, when they did that MRI, the concern about infections was more so like infections to his intestines.
Yes.
Or to like incisions.
Yes, to his incision site. And so we're like, how did this happen, right? Like, how did his brain get killed off? And what happened was like, because of the infections, it limited his blood supply to his brain, and his brain was still growing very quickly. Right. And so, like, cause he was so small, and that limited the blood to the brain and oxygen, and that's what killed it off. So it's like the infections, we thought like, just for the incision site, but it actually turned out to be a lot more as it is impacting his brain development.
Okay. So my thought as I was like trying to process how all of this must have felt for you is that throughout the process, like you all were fasting, you were praying, your family was fasting and praying. You're doing all the things that you should be doing. And I had the thought, like, I feel like it would be very easy to think we did everything that we were supposed to do. And yet he's ended up with these infections that led to circumstances that are like even worse than what we imagined. So I wondered, how were you able to put that into perspective and keep from becoming bitter? And what have you learned about prayer and fasting as a result of that?
Yeah, it was really hard. I think we talk a lot about like, when you pray, sometimes it doesn't answer the way that you would want, right? Like right. That's a common, we understand that. Like, I know that I don't pray and get everything I want. Right. And to have it be such a big thing and like so out of my control, it was really hard and devastating. That didn't work out the way I was hoping. And so in a lot of ways, I just had to redefine what's the miracle here. Redefine what is it that we saw as a result of like our fasting and prayers. I know our prayers were heard. I know that we were fasting and praying for these things, and I know there was power and protection given to Clay at the times that he really needed. And also, it didn't end up the way that we wanted. Right. And that's okay. Like, I just had to redefine, like, it's not the miracle that we were hoping for, but it's still a miracle that he's here, and he is here to teach me as a mom, as our family, like what we need to learn. And that's the miracle. We are becoming who we need to become through Clay, even though it's not what we had hoped or prayed for.
think that's so well said. And it reminds me, my father-in-law was recently talking to us about how we frequently pray with an end in mind, right? Like what we want to happen as a result of our prayers. And he's like, you know, it's so important for us to remember that we don't pray to change the will of God. And I think that can sometimes be like such a hard thing to, especially like you said, you know that Heavenly Father answers prayers. And then when it's this big thing that you're not asking for a bad thing, you're asking for like the most pure desire, and it's not happening the way that you expected. Staisha, you in the hospital, you wrote this. I've been thinking a lot about the power of the very small yet powerful word "and." It's the link that can bring together so much. Feeling overwhelmed and peaceful, hurt and healing, processing and regression, love and pain. I love that. I love the idea that like two things can be true at the same time. And I wondered, as you all have been through this experience that I think is like the ultimate emotional roller coaster, what have you learned about the ability of multiple things being true at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's changing the and, so it changes the but to the and, right? It's like, I think sometimes we'll say, oh, I'm so happy, but this is happening. And it's like the but kind of negates the first emotion, right? But the and can kind of like bind it together. And I really believe it's like there is opposition in all things. And it's like we have to feel that pain to feel the joy. And they are together, like through the hospital experience. And since we've been out, I have felt the biggest heartbreak and pain and sadness I think I've ever felt in my life. And I have been filled up with so much joy and happiness and peace. It's like you really do have to be carved out to your bottom of the barrel, like carve me out so I can be filled back up and feel those different emotions. And they are coming all throughout the day. It's like I can feel so much peace and also be scared for the future, And so it's not like a flipping the coin. It's like the coin is a whole. It's like faith and fear can coexist. Like my fear is going to almost propel my faith for the future, like, and hope. So like everything is so combined, and it really is kind of a one, even though it does feel so opposite of the spectrum.
Yeah, I often find myself when we're like praying for somebody that's going through something hard, praying for what I think the scriptures call like peace that passeth understanding, because it's like it doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't make sense that you could feel those two things at the same time. But I think that is, to your point at the very beginning of our conversation, like that is why God is so good, is because he can do things that feel impossible. Staisha, over 2 months passed before you all were discharged from the hospital. And I watched the video of you taking Clay home, which I should have been more emotionally prepared for. And it was very clear that that was super emotional for you. Talk to me about the range of emotions that you felt that day, and also kind of like what led to that moment of getting to take him home. Like, I'm sure there were big conversations surrounding that decision.
Yeah. Ooh, the NICU, the newborn intensive care unit, is a sacred place. And it also is a scary place.
Yes.
Where so much of it is out of your control. And a lot of times it was like, why is this happening? Like why? You kind of like, in a lot of ways, I felt like the hospital was like a safe place. All right. Like you think, oh, I'm going to go there and be healed. It'll be good. that wasn't our story. And that was okay. But to leave was, it was, felt like we, in a lot of ways, it was like, I wanted our story to be different. I wanted to be leaving and have it be not what it was. I didn't want to have a sick baby. I didn't want to be leaving and have Clay's brain be gone. And also, like, I was so grateful for the miracles that we did see there. I was grateful for the relationships that we had. I was grateful for the doctors and nurses who gave up time with their family to be with mine. And so it was a big win. And also it was the biggest heartache to know that I was taking home a baby that they had told me would not live very long. And that was hard because I wanted to be taking my baby home to go and be healed and to be fine and to move on from our life, move on with our life rather than be still stuck in this world, like this space of like the unknown of like what's going to happen.
Right. Which is like an extremely uncomfortable space for anybody, regardless of circumstance, but especially I'm sure when you're talking about your baby. The expectation that day was that you would go home. Clay was going to be on hospice and that you likely had 3 to 4 months with him at home. He is now nearly 2 years old. Is he 2 yet?
November.
Okay.
He'll be 2.
So talk to me about the joy that Clay has brought into your home and what it's meant to have this time with him, not only for you and Michael, but also for your kids, because I imagine they didn't really, did they get to see him at all in the hospital?
No. And that's the other really tricky part about the NICU is like our family was very split. Yeah. Right. It was like I had this baby in the hospital and then I had my kids at home. So it was constantly the back and the forth. And so leaving the hospital was like, okay, we're back as a whole family. And with that, it was tricky. It was like, I never thought I would have to tell my 4-year-old about a baby their brother who might not be with us for very long. We had a lot of hard conversations at the beginning, but the joy that was brought is the kids didn't see any of his limitations. Like we would say, we don't know how much he can see or how much he can hear. And
it doesn't stop them.
Yeah. And so then she's like, my oldest Lucy, she was 4 at the time. She would get these soft toys and come put it by his face. And she's like, look, Mom, Clay likes this because it's so soft. Or we'd have to talk about Clay might be in a wheelchair and we live out on a ranch and Lucy and the boys love to go on the trailer of the tractor. And Lucy came, she's like, Mom, it's okay if Clay's in a wheelchair. We'll just get a ramp. He can go up on the trailer and we'll put these blocks around it so his wheelchair won't fall off, like they are so pure in their hearts and things like that. It's like, that doesn't matter, Mom, he's our brother. And then my kids started praying that Clay wouldn't die. And honestly, I think that's why he's still here. That my little 4-year-old and 3-year-old would say, Dear Heavenly Father, please bless Clay won't die. We love him so much. And he's brought a peace to our family that's like we didn't know we needed. Where he is just, you look at him, he'll just smile. The kids love to make him laugh. And it's like, so he might not ever really say, Lucy, come chase me around the room. But he has a little chair that he sits in and they push him around. And they make him feel a part of their Lego building or their pretend play. Like they want him to be a part. And he's such a big part of our family. And we've had to talk about like, if Clay goes, it's just our brother in heaven. And he still will love you and he still will be here. And so the joy of knowing that he's here now and the joy that he brings us, but also knowing that if he does go, we still will have that brother in heaven who will be our protecting angel, you know? And so in a lot of ways for now and in the future, it's like Clay's here and he's making it. So life is bigger than what it is. You know, it's like, it's so much that there's so much more purpose now because of Clay.
Yeah. Staisha, I wanted to ask you about, you wrote on Instagram that one thing that had been hard was recognizing that it wasn't necessarily like helping anything to continue to think like, oh, live every day like it's your last or his last, or I need to like cherish every single moment. And instead that this has taught you to kind of live in the present. What do you feel like you've learned about that?
When we first brought Clay home, the most well-intended individuals, like, you just have to soak up every moment. And I was like, have you tried to live that way? Like, have you tried to really soak up every moment? It's impossible.
And exhausting.
You will explode. Like, you can't do it. And then it's like you're stressed that you're not soaking it all up. And it's like, no, like, we just need to live. And that's kind of what Clay has taught us. Like, I don't know what's going to happen with Clay. We still have a lot of medical professionals saying like, he's not gonna make it, you know? I'm like, but he's choosing to live right now. And so I'm going to choose to live right now. And we can't focus on too far down the road because I already know the ending of this story. And this story is pretty great. It's like, we have made covenants that whatever happens, this story ends up that we're going to be together. And so today we're just going to live because I can't put that much energy into soaking it all up. We just have to live and be and choose this day to be okay, you know, and tomorrow might not be, and we'll figure that out tomorrow. But like today, we're going to choose to live.
Yeah. I want to touch on something you just said, and I didn't prepare you for this, so hopefully that's okay. But you mentioned covenants, and that's something that I've been thinking about a ton lately, is just like the power of covenants. And I feel like watching people in my life that have gone through like really, really hard things, it seems like that's when you come to appreciate covenants on like a whole new level that you never did before. What would you say, like, how has this experience increased your appreciation for the ability to make promises with a God that always keeps his promises?
I think that goes back to like when I've prayed for things and it didn't end up the way that I wanted now. It's like sometimes my mortal brain is just like, why is it happening this way? And then I remember it's like, it doesn't really matter right now because I've been promised that the eternities are going to work themselves out, that this mortal life is just for me to prepare to meet God, to trust and to make these covenants. And once again, the end of this story, the end of this mortal experience, we know is going to be incredible if we choose to keep living our covenants. And so, yeah, that's, I think, what keeps it in perspective is God will not back out on his promises. He won't. And we might have bumps and bruises along the way. We will. It's not if. We will, you know, but the end is going to be okay. It all is going to work out.
I love that. Okay, your family has tried to make some very intentional memories together since you brought Clay home. You wrote about how you went to Las Vegas and to Disneyland. Tell me about why it's important you feel like it's been important to make that effort. I'm sure it's not an easy thing.
Yeah, it's like traveling with 4 children under the age of 4 at this time. Like, that's no joke. It is not, it is not like a much of a vacation for me. However, I felt very strongly. It's like my children, Lucy, Caleb, and Wesley, they didn't know Clay out. Like we would pass the hospital and they couldn't come in with me, and they would just say, "That's where Clay is, Mom. That's where you're going." And they knew I was gone, and they felt that absence, and they were kind of all over the place. And so I'm like, now that Clay's here, we don't know how long we're going to have him, but we need to create positive memories with our family of 6 that aren't in the hospital, that aren't on high alert stress all the time of like, are we going to get called in for another surgery? Are we going to have a big setback today? It's like, we just needed to create something positive to remember this time together. And so we try to escape the snow. Like, the year that Clay was born was the worst winter that Utah has seen in a long, long time. So, and especially where we lived, we still had snow when he came home and many months after. So it's like, let's go somewhere warm and let's just make these positive memories that we can remember the good times that Clay, like us together with Clay, and not he was always in the hospital or it was always super stressful. Let's rewrite this story a little bit to make it a little happier, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's power in that, like taking control of your own narrative a little bit, because I think while Heavenly Father wants us to turn our pencil over to him and let him write our story, he also wants us to be co-creators with him. And so if we're not doing that, that's on us. Another thing that you did, Staisha, that I loved was you said that you felt like you needed to do something together with him that would be memorable and important. And this is the part that makes me emotional. So you began reading the Book of Mormon out loud to him. I wondered, what did that experience mean to you? And what did you learn from or about the Book of Mormon from that particular reading of it?
Yeah, it was, we don't know everything that happens in the spirit world, like I don't know all the details, but I do know that we will have the chance to be missionaries to those who've never heard about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so as I was potentially preparing for the death of my son, I was like, if he's going to go be a missionary, I want him to know from my voice about the Savior. And what better way can we learn about Christ than through reading the Book of Mormon? And so I did. I read it out loud. And at the time, once again, we were told that he was deaf in one ear and he wasn't going to process certain things. Like, he couldn't really process or see. And so it was kind of like, why would you even read it? And also, he's an infant, it's like he's not going to get anything out of this. But as I read it, my heart was healed. And I was reminded that even though our mortal minds do not understand everything, like we don't understand every scripture, or why are there so many war chapters in the Book of Mormon, or things like that, my spirit was fed. And I was reminded of the power of Christ, that through Christ, everything is made right. And it was very powerful experience to have that with Clay as I read it to him. And just, if nothing else, as a mom, you want to prepare your kids for the future as best you can. And I didn't know what the future for Clay would be, but I wanted him to know, and at least have heard or have felt the power of the Book of Mormon. That even just opening the book, there is a connection. Your spirit will feel something. Your brain might not understand all the scriptures you read, but opening the Book of Mormon, reading the verses, your spirit feels something. And I know that he did. He felt something. And I felt the power, once again, of the Book of Mormon, the truthfulness of that book. So it was a beautiful experience for sure.
That's a beautiful testimony, and I appreciate you sharing it. As you were talking, I was thinking everybody listening that is doing Come Follow Me can relate to the question of why are there so many war chapters, because I've been asking the same question lately. But also, like any parent who's tried to read the Book of Mormon with their kids, regardless of any physical limitation. Like we try to read a few verses with Emma every night and she tends to like scream through them. I'm like, she's gonna hate the scriptures as a result of our efforts here. But I do think, like you said, like there is a power in opening the book and making that effort, and the Lord loves effort. And I love so much that you did that with Clay. Okay. So after you had been home for a few months, you wrote one day about just like an ordinary day. And I loved what you wrote. You said, today was a perfect day, a day when things didn't feel super heavy or hard. The kids still fought and had tears and big emotions. But as I sat at the dinner table, listening to the nonstop chatter of Lucy telling Michael stories of the day and Caleb chipping in when necessary, Wes squealing and squawking as he does, and then seeing Michael hold Clay, who was peaceful and content, I was just hit with an intense wave of love and gratitude. These are my people, my children, my spouse, my whole world. Then as we went outside and Michael took the kids on the four-wheeler to fix the fence by the south pond, I strapped on Clay so I could go prune some trees so they wouldn't smack me in the face when I mow the lawn. I was overcome again with the gratitude and love I have for my family. Then as I carried Clay and walked over to where Michael and the kids were fixing the fence, the air temperature was perfect and spring is here. Everything is coming back to life and turning green. It was magical. Then seeing Michael fix the fence while the kids played and explored, my heart burst. It felt so right and felt so whole. Just a little family of 6 living on a ranch, living our best lives. Then we came back inside for bath time and stories. We prayed as a family and recited our scripture, 2 Nephi 2:25. Adam fell that men might be and men are that they might have joy. So much joy. And then the kids were in bed and the house was quiet. And as I was doing the dishes, my heart started to feel so heavy and sad, thinking of how soon this might be over. How much longer will Clay be with us physically? And I just couldn't stop sobbing. The pain of loss just hurt so bad. But oh, how grateful that I could feel of the love and joy today as well. Staisha, first of all, you have a gift with words, because I think it's just like so beautiful the way that you describe just that feeling, which is a difficult one to describe. And it goes back to what we talked about before about like both things being able to be true. But I wondered, what has this experience taught you about mortality and the purpose of it?
Oh man, Morgan, there have been so many times I've questioned why did this have to happen this way? On my 4th baby, I had an eclampsia seizure. Like, that is so unheard of. We go to the hospital and Clay has these surgeries and these infections that lead to his brain just being killed off, and like, why is this the way that it happened? And there have been so many or several sweet times where I'm praying, like, Holy Father, help me feel connected to this baby. Like, I don't remember his birth. It's kind of a fog after, like, help me feel the reason why. And there have been times when it's like I've just been looking at like Clay, and it's like our spirits connect, and he's like, it's okay, Mom. This needed to happen this way. It's no one's fault. And I think that's what mortality is. It's where we have to take a step back and look at the big picture. Clay is what he is because that's what he needed to be. Like, it wasn't, once again, this isn't a coincidence. It's not someone's fault. He knew before he came that this would probably be his story, and that's okay. And I think having that understanding is like, this isn't the end. Like, this mortal experience, once again, we're just doing the best we can, but it is through Christ that we are going to be whole. Like, I've said it again, but like, the end of this story is beautiful. We are all going to be together again, and it's going to be okay. And we have to feel these feelings so that we can really experience the joy and the peace and the sadness and the heartache. Like, it's all part of it, because the end is going to be so great and beautiful.
I agree completely. And as you're talking, for some reason, I started thinking about Christ and like why Christ came. And I think he came because that mortal experience is so worth having, and feeling the joy of those relationships and all of that. Like, that's something that he wanted as well. Staisha, you mentioned in the thing that I just read that you were pruning fruit trees. And when I first asked you about whether you'd be willing to do this, you told me that you come from a family of generational fruit farmers, and that you have often found yourself comparing what you're experiencing with clay to pruning fruit trees. Yeah. I wondered if you could tell listeners a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I grew up in Orem, Utah. And my grandparents and great grandparents, they kind of were here. And before Orem was all built out, it was all orchards. But by the time I came around, the orchards were slim picking. Like, there weren't a lot, but we had a little property close to our home it was about 5 acres, all of fruit trees. And so I grew up pruning trees, and it was probably my least favorite part of the whole process, because you had to go, and it was just a lot. You had to cut all these branches. And when you're pruning a tree, you cut off the dead parts first, and then any branches that are crossing. So cut off those, and then you kind of shape the tree to where you want it to be growing. And you would think this pruning is hurting the tree. Like, you're cutting it down basically to a stump almost in a lot of ways. But I always remember my dad saying pruning stimulates growth. And I think that's what clay's been for me. It's like I have been pruned down to nothing, basically. And it has been crazy how the growth has been stimulated, and how I have grown, and I have tried to become with more empathy and more compassion, more hope for the future of like, my covenants mean something, and we're going to be okay, And so the pruning has been done, and I'll be pruned again. It's like, it's not like you're one and done pruning. It's like every spring you got to prune, and then you go put all the clippings into the burn pile, and you burn those out, and then you grow, and then you bear fruit, and then winter comes and you got to be pruned again. And so, but that's the pruning stimulates the growth. And it's like through hard things, like everyone has hard things. Everyone does. I am not some special case here. I'm nothing. I'm a 35-year-old mom of 4 kids living in the wilderness. Like, I am nothing special, but like, we all have our hard stuff. And it is through that process of pruning that we can grow and become what Heavenly Father and our Heavenly parents need us to be and become.
I love that so much. It reminds me of the Hubie Brown story, I'm the gardener here. I know what I want you to be. Yeah. Which does, like, that idea of being pruned feels so counterintuitive. Like, why do you have to cut me down? But I think that you just described that so beautifully. Staisha, my last question for you is, what does it mean to you to be all in the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Oh my gosh, Morgan, I've heard you ask this question hundreds of times. And I've always thought, what would I say in that situation? And I think it has, my answer has changed and evolved a little bit. And I think sometimes when you say all in, it's like, oh, that means you have to be 100%, that you have to know everything and understand everything or accept everything. And it's like, for me, all in means that I keep showing up. That when I'm at 20% or 10% or 5% or whatever it is, like keep showing up, because I've made covenants and I know that it is through Christ that I can be 100%. That it is through Christ and his mercy and his grace that it's all going to work out. So just to keep trying and don't give up, because life is going to prune you down to a stub, and that's okay, because you will grow. You will learn, but don't give up on what you know to be true. And there's so many things that can cause doubts and frustration, and that's okay. But keep showing up, because that's what it means for me to be all in. I'm never 100%, but I can bring my little meager offering, and I know that it's through Christ that offering can be made complete.
So beautiful. Staisha, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. You are absolutely incredible. And I feel like I should tell people, like, Staisha, you've always been a light. It's not just in this circumstance. Like, you were like this long before the experience with Clay, but I'm sure that it has refined you and made you better and stronger. And that's life. And so Thank you for sharing who you are with us.
Morgan, it is a privilege and an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much.
We are so grateful to Staisha Sheffield for joining us on today's episode. We are also grateful, as always, to Derek Campbell of Mix at Six Studios for his help with this episode. And we are so grateful for the time that you take to spend with us. We will look forward to being with you again next week.